going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. So glad to have you with us this morning. So today is, it's actually our final Sunday in the season of Epiphany. This season in which we tell these great stories about Jesus' life, and then we ask ourselves, what's being revealed here, and how should we respond? And our story for today that we read a little bit ago is really kind of the big moment. The Transfiguration is sort of the pinnacle of the Epiphany season. This moment of profound revelation that begins by telling us that Jesus took Peter, John, and James with him and went up on a mountain to pray. And the mountain, sort of in biblical literature, is this thematic stream that runs through the story of God. People often meet with God on top of mountains. It's not just contemporary Christian music videos where they're on the mountains. This is normal. It's where this often happens symbolically. And Jesus is on this mountain, and it says he was praying, and the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. And two men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. So this is from Luke chapter 9. And of course, Luke's gospel, it tells us a lot of stuff the others don't. Like, it has all the details about his birth narrative that's in Luke. And often it's God revealing God's self to very ordinary people. I mean, think about just Mary, very ordinary person, meets with this angel, and her life is never the same. Zechariah, Elizabeth with John the Baptist. And then there's these songs, like Mary's song especially, talking about this great leveling where the mighty will be brought low and the lowly will be brought up. Zechariah's song, Simeon's song, promising God's presence in ordinary things. The whole birth narrative, the angels with the shepherds, another bunch of ordinary guys. And then there's these normal things, Jesus' dedication at the temple, when he goes back to the temple when he's 12 years old, his testing in the wilderness, his rejection at Nazareth, his healings, his forgiving of sins, which, by the way, happened before cross and resurrection, this forgiveness. And he also starts messing with some of their normal practices, like Sabbath practices. He delivers the Sermon on the Plain that we talked about, blessings for those on the bottom and woes for those on the top. Things like love is stronger than hate, and generosity is stronger than greed. Humility is stronger than pride and arrogance, and that a good person will bring forth goodness just out of the goodness of their heart, and an evil person will bring forth evil into the world. And then Luke records all of these miracles. He heals the centurion's son from far away. That's a Gentile. He's helping. He raises a boy from the dead. He's anointed for his burial. He tells parables like the parable of the seed. He calmed the storm on the seas, casts out demons from the man who they go into the pigs, remember, and the pigs run into the sea. He heals the woman with the flow of blood. He raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. So this is all leading up to chapter 9. All that stuff is crammed into the first part of Luke. And then in chapter 9, he sends his disciples out in pairs, saying, proclaim the kingdom of God and heal the sick. And so his ministry now has kind of gone from this local thing to a regional thing. And it says even King Herod started hearing about it. He starts going, who is this guy? And his people say, well, some say it's John the Baptist, some say Elijah or one of the prophets. And in Luke 9, Herod actually says, I beheaded John. Who then is this I hear such things about? And it says Herod tried to see him. He wanted to meet this guy. So his ministry is getting big. Even Herod is asking really kind of the central question of the Gospel of Luke, who is this Jesus? And the disciples, they head back home, and when they get there, 5,000 people are waiting for Jesus. And he teaches them, heals many. He feeds them all miraculously, kind of symbolizing that in his kingdom, there's always enough for everyone. Then he went away to pray with his disciples, and he asked them the question, who does everybody say that I am? So first you got Herod asking this question, and then people asking the question. Now Jesus is asking the question of his disciples. Luke's trying to make it obvious for us. This is the question hanging in the air. And they say the same thing, the usual suspects. Like, you might be John the Baptist, come back to life, Elijah, one of the prophets. And then he asked them directly, who do you say that I am? And in this moment of Epiphany, Peter says, you're Messiah. And then Jesus just kind of drops a bomb. He says, here's what's going to happen. The leaders are going to have me killed. And then 3 days later, I'm going to rise again. And then he says this famous line, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. And then the very next thing that happens is he takes Peter, James, and John, and they go up on this mountain to pray. So by the time we get to this story in Luke chapter 9, this transfiguration, these guys have already seen a bunch of things they couldn't explain. I mean, curing leprosy, paralysis, raising from the dead, there's no explanation in their world for this. And so, of course, they're asking, who is this guy? But nothing would compare with what they're about to see. They climb this mountain with Jesus, and then we're told that they immediately fell asleep, which is great. It makes me feel so much better as a disciple. You know, and in ancient literature, biblical literature, same thing as a mountain. Sleeping is always a symbol of uncomprehending, right? They don't get it. They're in this drowsy fog. Barbara Taylor says that it's as if the mighty had sifted sleeping powder over their heads to protect them from the things they were not equipped to see. Peter, James, and John are my guys here. They were ready for this. And really, who could be ready? So Jesus is praying, and it says, suddenly his face changed, and he began emanating this light, like a flash of lightning. And a thick cloud descended upon the mountain, overshadowing him. And then we're told 2 men appear with him, Moses and Elijah. And they heard the voice of God. Now, any good Jewish reader of this text would immediately be thinking of the Exodus story. Remember the story of Moses when he climbed a mountain, Mount Sinai, and a thick cloud descended on the mountain, overshadowing him, and he heard the voice of God. And Moses, in the story, he didn't know it until he came down, but his face was glowing. It was shining brightly, and it kind of freaked everybody out. So he had to actually put a veil over his face to calm people down. Remember that whole story? It's interesting. This is Michelangelo's famous sculpture of Moses. You notice anything weird about this? Yeah, what's with the horns? Well, it turns out the Hebrew word for shining or beaming is karan, which is derived from the noun karen, which means horn. And in ancient Hebrew, you don't write the vowels. You only write the consonants. So on the page, this looks the same. So some interpreters, apparently Michelangelo included, concluded that Moses' face had sprouted horns. Rashi, one of the great rabbis, said that the light shines out and projects like a sort of horn. But everybody agreed something incredible had happened to Moses. 40 days up on this mountain where he asked to see God's glory, and God hid him in a cave. And then passed by. So Moses only saw his back or where he had just been. And even that was enough to light his face up like a Christmas tree. And in the story of God, one of the things that they remembered and wrote down was that God always seemed to shield God's people, in a sense, from the full impact of God's deity. It was said that no one could see God and live. So God's presence was hidden, usually in a cloud, often described as brighter than the sun, almost like a doorway to another dimension that, though it was closed, like beams of light would seep through the cracks and disturb everyone who encountered it. And the people of God began to call this light that was sort of leaking through God's glory, kavod in Hebrew. It's a word, it's weird. It's a word that means glory or splendor, but it also means weight or weightiness or heaviness, like an overwhelming gravity, so intense that they sort of needed protection. so as to not be crushed or consumed. And sometimes when they would worship, this light would just show up in the temple or the tabernacle before that. And the brighter the light, the thicker the cloud had to be. And sometimes it was so thick they couldn't even see each other. All they could see, Barbara Taylor again writes, was a dazzling brightness that left stars in their eyes long after it was over. But no matter how strong it was, how palpable, God remained hidden inside of it. You see, God is not a thing that we can see with our eyes. God is not a thing at all in the normal sense. God is sort of beyond thingness in a whole different category of being. And so the presence of God is always symbolized as shrouded in mystery, sort of almost for our own protection. Nobody could see God, but they could see where God had been, still on fire, with the dazzling brightness that left stars in their eyes. And most would hide their faces, and it was just more than they could bear. But Moses longed for more, and even then he was only able to see God's back or where God had been. And even that would light him up like a glow stick for weeks. You can just picture Moses on the mountain of God for 40 days and 40 nights. Last time he was up there, by the way, he came down to find them worshiping the golden calf. But this time they all rushed to greet him. And when they got close, he was glowing, and fear rushed through their bodies. And it made them back away. Even Aaron, his brother, didn't want to be near him. And finally, Moses gathered them all together, got them to draw near and to listen as he gave them the law, the 10 Commandments. And from that moment on, he wore a veil over his face so he wouldn't frighten the children of Israel. Although some suspected that after a while he kept the veil on because the glory was fading and he didn't want everybody to know. And friend. And so Moses became someone they could look to mediate God's presence to the people, all because of what had happened on that mountain. Years later, Elijah climbed, some say, the same mountain, and the Lord told him to stand in the mouth of the cave because Yahweh is going to pass by him as well, and a powerful wind tore the mountain at his feet, and an earthquake shook the trees, and a fire ripped through the valley before him, but the Lord was not in those things. Remember this story? And then when the Lord finally showed up, it was in the silence, like a whisper. 1 Kings says, when Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face. Elijah veiled his own face, just like Moses. And then here, Peter, James, and John, they'd been raised on stories of Moses and Elijah. So when Jesus climbs a mountain to meet with God, and he's lit up with a glorious fire, and a thick cloud descended, and they heard this voice. And then Moses and Elijah show up, two great luminaries who had met with God on mountains and having the same kind of experience. They would have known exactly what was going on here. I mean, this was actually kind of on the nose for Jesus in his way of doing things. It's the same cloud. It's the same voice. The same light and presence. God was appearing on the mountaintop. It was an epiphany, a theophany. Only for Jesus, it was different in one respect. The light didn't seem to be reflecting from somewhere else. Jesus' own face was crackling with the power of God's presence. In fact, Moses and Elijah, when they spontaneously appear, it's almost like they're the moon and Jesus is the sun. He seemed to be the source of the light. And Moses and Elijah are totally cool with this. They're just unfazed by this, stopping by for a little chat with Jesus, the human welding rod. And it's interesting that in this case, we're actually told the topic of their conversation. It says they spoke about his departure, which he was about to fulfill in Jerusalem. And the Greek word there, it's actually Exodus. That's the word. So he spoke about Jesus' Exodus. Just like Moses had an exodus, led the children of Israel out of bondage in Egypt. It's like Elijah had an exodus, leading his people out of bondage to Jezebel and Ahab and the prophets of Baal. Part of what's revealed here on the mountain in the Transfiguration is that Jesus' mission is a new exodus. Only he's delivering all of humanity from this bondage to sin and death and a bondage that was kind of an estrangement from God. He's bringing good news specifically to the poor, the vulnerable, the excluded. And to a Jewish reader, I mean, you got Moses here. Moses gave them the law, so he represents the law in their faith. And for a while, they thought they had God figured out with the law. Just follow these rules and regulations, and you'll see God. But some people kept the letter of the law and treated their neighbor like trash. And other people used the rules and regulations to punish and to exclude. And so along came the prophets. Elijah represents the prophets. And for a while, they thought they had God figured out with the prophets. And you just treat your neighbor with justice and mercy, and you'll see God. But the wealthy leaders of Israel could never seem to quite do this. And so now Jesus appears. And he began teaching them something actually quite radical. He said that God was actually always with them. Anytime they were with another person, with love passing between them, this was actually God living in and through them. I mean, this is his promise when 2 or 3 are gathered. Like anytime we live together in loving, self-emptying ways, taking up our cross, God will sort of explode into the world through ordinary people and relationships. And I think it's strange and sort of important for us to notice that the only people who could ever really hear this from Jesus were those who were a little bit desperate to see God. You know, those who lived on the margins, those who felt too broken to see God or excluded from God's blessing for some reason. And Jesus preached over and over that those who are just sure they have God sorted almost never do. And part of what he taught was that God is most often lost by being thought found. And so as soon as they thought they had God sorted in the law, that's Moses in the story, the law sort of had to go away. As soon as they thought they had God sorted in the prophets, that's Elijah here, the prophets had to go away. As soon as Peter, James, and John thought they had God sorted in Jesus, even Jesus had to go away, in a sense. I mean, this is part of the meaning of the deal where Peter says, let's make 3 tents and just stay here on the mountain with God shining through you. They're trying to contain God. And he's like, no, he leads them down the mountain. He swore him to secrecy. Because anytime we're convinced we have God sorted or contained or explained, we run the risk of losing the mystery. In effect, turning God into an idol. This is part of why God always, whenever God comes close to us, God seems shrouded in mystery. And so, in a sense, the only way to see God is to attend to the mystery. The mystics called this entering into the great cloud of unknowing. And yet, we spend so much of our lives trying to drain the world of mystery, trying to name things, control them, explain them. And so maybe it's not so surprising that it has become difficult to believe, to see God. And people of God have always talked about the way the presence of God can become discernible to human beings. But it's like the closer God came, the crazier people seem to get. God's just too big and infinite and overwhelming for comprehension. Any direct encounter is just too much. And so a veil was necessary, a little cloud cover to keep the people safe. And what's revealed in the Transfiguration is is that this is one of those things that the people of God sort of, they kind of had wrong. Ordinary places, in ordinary days. God is not contained in the law or the prophets. God is contained, or maybe displayed, lives within ordinary people and places. This is how Paul said it in 2 Corinthians 3. He said, unlike Moses, we have nothing to hide. Everything is out in the open. He wore a veil so the children of Israel wouldn't notice that the glory was fading away. They didn't notice it then, and they don't notice it now. Don't notice that there's nothing left behind that veil. Even today, when the proclamations of that old bankrupt government are read out, they can't see through it. Only Christ can get rid of the veil so they can see for themselves there's nothing there. Whenever they turn to face God as Moses did, God removes the veil. There they are, face to face. They suddenly recognize that God is a living, personal presence, not a piece of chiseled stone. And when God is personally present, a living spirit, that old constricting legislation is recognized as obsolete. And we're free of it, all of us. Nothing, he says, between us and God. Our faces shining with the brightness of his face. And so we are transfigured. That's a crazy thing to say. And so we are transfigured, much like the Messiah. Our lives gradually becoming brighter and more beautiful as God enters our lives and we become like him. I mean, this is at the essence of what it means to be a Christian. It's the end of the far-off God and the revelation of this God who is present and living through human beings whenever two or three are gathered in love. God is most often revealed through normal people, bearing God's image to each other. And as we follow Jesus, this is part of how we become renewed in the image of God. And God starts to live through us, shine through us, as Paul said, a living personal presence, not a piece of chiseled stone, not an idol. Our faces shine with the brightness of God's face. I mean, if we ever really believe that, the person next to you, the annoying neighbor, the boss that you make fun of behind their back, like God is shining through the brightness of God's face. Anyone can be transfigured like Jesus, Paul says. Our lives can become bright and beautiful as we become human, as human was intended to be. We're meant to believe, as Barbara Taylor wrote, that the world is made out of light, which is straining against the skin of the world. I love that line. This light straining against, trying to break free from the skin of the world, even as we speak. And you never know when a face may begin to shine, including your own. But even when we cannot see the light, we believe in it because we have heard the stories. We know that God's glory is pulsing just beneath the surface of things with the power to transfigure the darkest of our days. Oh man, do we need that, right? This Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, which is the beginning of the season of Lent. And one thing we say every year is that Lent is sort of basic training in how to see the mysterious presence of God. And during Lent, one of the things we do is we take part in these little daily fasts. So we give up sweets or chocolates or coffee, something small. And when we do, fasting opens up a little space for God where chocolate used to be. And if we can learn to see God in that simple discipline of fasting, maybe we can begin to see God in other normal, everyday things. And fasting can also cause a little discomfort, a little pain. And the idea is if we can learn to see God just in the little pain of fasting, maybe we can learn to see God in the midst of the big pains of life. I mean, because it's often the mountaintop, and good or bad can push us up there. It's like the death of a parent, or we fall in love, or we get divorced, or we have a child, or the child leaves home. It's those mountaintop moments when we search so hard for meaning. And often you'll even hear someone who doesn't believe in God. They find themselves holding their firstborn child and turning their eyes to heaven, just looking for somebody to thank when they don't even believe in God, you know? And they start to have doubts about their doubts. There's a kind of meaning in those things. The big stuff, having a baby or losing a parent, anything big that even a committed atheist can't deny. Something's shining through this, and I don't know its name. And I think that part of what Jesus is trying to convince us is we can believe that God can show up on those mountaintops when the world seems to be glowing and pulsing with the presence of God. Then surely we can see God in normal, everyday things as well. Because that's where we live most of the time, in the mundane. And so Lent is this season of practicing and training, of opening up space for God through fasting, just in our ordinary days, and then asking God to inhabit that space. Hoping if we can learn to see God in those little things, little pains of fasting, maybe we can see God in the big stuff too. Because God truly is there within the human experience. God is actually shining through every person we ever meet, living within each of us. It just takes some practice to see God's presence. There's this famous quote. It's one of my favorites. I think this, I bet, 10 times a week, from Paula DRC. She says, God comes to you disguised as your life. God comes to us just dressed up, veiled, disguised as our life. I think this is much of what Jesus was trying to get us to see. Most of the time, God just shows up disguised as life, as ordinary days and ordinary people and ordinary tasks shrouded in mystery. And if we can train ourselves to attend to the mystery of the divine in the ordinary, we'll start to see God. And we'll know that we're not alone. This God who's shrouded in the mystery of the everyday. And it's tempting to believe that this only happens to like the saints, you know, and the mystics, the spiritual giants who have the time or the ability to discern God's presence. It's actually kind of hard to believe that ordinary people like us can have encounters with God through ordinary things on ordinary days. But this is exactly what Jesus promises to those who follow him. I heard a story one time about a mom who was trying so hard to see God in her own life. But she was juggling work and kids and home and family. And yet she would still, every day, set her alarm. She'd get up really early and try to get a little time to pray and read her Bible. But it seemed like no matter how early she got up, her kids would wake up too. They were at that age, you know, and they would interrupt her. And so she never got around to praying or reading her Bible. And she felt like such a failure. And one day she was talking with her spiritual teacher, and she said, I see the icons of these saints in holy tranquility, like kneeling beside some stream, looking up serenely into the light of God's presence. She's like, it makes me wonder, where's the icon of the mom who's losing her mind? Like, that's the icon I want to see. You know, the mom with one child on her hip and another on the floor and dinner on the stove, smoking and everybody screaming. Where's the icon of how God shows up in that? And her teacher was wise and said, okay, I want you to say all that to me again. And I'm going to answer you the way I think God actually really answers you when you say that. So the woman said it all again. I wake up early to pray and to read, but my kids wake up too. And I have to feed them and play with them and talk to them. And so I never get around to praying. I never get around to reading. I don't feel like I'm making time for you, God. And her teacher said, this is what I think God would say. I think God would say, I just love you so much. And I see the way you care for your kids. I see the way you love your family. I'm so proud of you. And your life, you are just so precious to me. And I can't get enough of you. I can't get enough of your life. And I'm so pleased when you get up early to try to spend some time with me. It just means so much to me that you would do that sometimes I can hardly stand it. And so what I do is I rush into the bodies of your children and I wake them up. Because I want to know what it feels like to be loved by you, to be held by you, just to spend an ordinary morning with you. It's beautiful for me. It's my favorite thing, the way you love me and hold me when you love your kids, when you hold your kids. And of course, this is how it works. God comes to us disguised as our life, all of it shrouded, veiled in the mystery of the divine. We just have to learn how to see God in the ordinary things, shining through everywhere and always, just waiting to be seen. Amen? Let's pray. Oh God, we do pray that you would come to us in our ordinary lives. Because this is all we're going to ever have. And I pray that we would stop feeling like failures. And we would just dare to believe that you're always here. That to love our kids is to love you. To love our neighbor is to pray. And that every encounter can be an encounter with you. As we think about heading into the season of Lent, God, we ask you to be with us. As we gather on Ash Wednesday to pray and kind of consecrate this season of Lent for this year, pray that you would be with us. Help us to be brave and have courage and to start to see you everywhere. Watch over Redemption Church in this Lent season, we ask. Amen.